Look at the raw, unedited propaganda footage broadcast in December of 2011. Sitting perfectly intact on the polished hardwood of a Tehran gymnasium floor is America's most classified stealth asset, the Beast of Kandahar. Zoom in tight on that pristine, bat-winged fuselage. You are looking at a strict aerodynamic impossibility. An aircraft cruising at 50,000 feet cannot simply fall out of the sky and survive without a single scratch on its carbon fiber skin. It was not shot down. It was kidnapped. You might think this is just an isolated incident of military espionage, but you are wrong. The exact same invisible mathematical exploit used to blind $1 billion Central Intelligence Agency drone is currently navigating your car, guiding your smartphone, and routing the commercial flight your family is on right now. If the apex of American military encryption can be tricked into landing in a hostile desert, your everyday reliance on digital signals leaves you utterly defenseless. We are going to strip away the political noise and the classified briefings and look exclusively at the cold physics of the ultimate cyber heist. The official narrative of impenetrable military supremacy is a myth. Through the lens of the electromagnetic spectrum, we will deconstruct this crime scene piece by piece. I'm going to show you exactly how an adversary with a radio transmitter learned to weaponize fundamental mathematics to feed a perfect, devastating lie to a highly advanced machine. We begin on a desolate, sun-baked airstrip in Afghanistan. The wind blows fine, abrasive dust across the cracked tarmac. Inside the heavily fortified command center, a digitized tactical map glows in the dim light. A single, pulsing green icon represents the RQ-170 Sentinel drone, silently crossing the hostile border. And then, without a single warning light, the icon simply blinks out of existence. Total, suffocating silence fills the room. This is the physical manifestation of losing absolute control over your most dangerous, classified asset. In December of 2011, the Central Intelligence Agency believed they owned the sky. They were operating the Sentinel, a completely tailless, bat-winged aircraft coated in highly classified, radar-absorbent materials. It was the crown jewel of American aerospace engineering, built on the arrogant assumption that it simply could not be touched by enemy hands. Your high school physics textbooks tell you that stealth technology means true invisibility. But that is a comforting lie. Stealth does not make an aircraft vanish. It merely delays detection until it is far too late for the enemy to pull the trigger. By mathematically bending electromagnetic waves around its fuselage, the Sentinel manipulated physics to project a radar cross-section roughly the size of a small, harmless bird. It was a phantom, designed to glide undetected above sovereign airspace. To maintain this illusion, the drone required absolute, unbroken communication. Cruising effortlessly at an altitude of 50,000 feet, the machine was never truly autonomous. It relied entirely on a continuous, heavily encrypted satellite uplink. Every microscopic adjustment to its flight path was dictated by human pilots sitting comfortably in air-conditioned bunkers thousands of miles away in the Nevada desert. They held the digital leash. When that critical signal was suddenly lost over the Iranian border, the initial assumption back in Washington was immediate, catastrophic mechanical failure. It is a fundamental law of aviation that gravity always wins. An engine stalls, a hydraulic line bursts, and a 50,000-foot drop reduces a masterpiece of engineering to twisted wreckage. The analysts expected the satellites to eventually find a shattered, burned-out debris field of toxic carbon fiber. But the statistics of aviation disasters lie when you are dealing with a hijacked digital brain. A mechanical failure leaves an erratic, panicking trail of telemetry before the inevitable crash. The radar operators in the operations center scoured the spectrum, expecting to see the chaotic signature of a dying aircraft spiraling toward the Earth. Instead, they found absolutely nothing. The silence was too perfect, too clean. It defied every known protocol of mechanical death. We are looking at a paradox that shatters the official narrative of American technological dominance. The operators frantically rebooted their tracking algorithms, assuming a glitch in their own incredibly expensive hardware. But the screens remained stubbornly blank. The drone had not drifted out of range, nor had it reported a sudden drop in fuel pressure or a catastrophic engine fire. It was as if the laws of physics had simply paused to erase the aircraft from the sky entirely. The panic inside the command center was not just about losing $1 billion of taxpayer money. It was the terrifying realization that their telemetry was perfectly fine. They were not blind. The machine had simply ceased to exist in the digital realm. The operators were staring at the chilling evidence of an impossible crime. You do not just misplace an advanced reconnaissance drone over one of the most heavily monitored airspaces on the planet without someone leaving a fingerprint. To the seasoned intelligence officer, the absence of data is the most terrifying data point of all. If a surface-to-air missile had shredded the fuselage, the drone's sensors would have screamed in agony, broadcasting a frantic burst of error codes before going dark. But there was no scream. There was no explosion. The telemetry did not glitch. It was severed with the absolute, terrifying precision of a surgeon's scalpel, leaving the pilots holding a dead connection. This brings us to the concept of the digital black hole. A fully functional, encrypted stealth aircraft does not just willingly fly into the abyss. It was lured. The drone did not report a malfunction because, as far as its infected electronic brain was concerned, everything was proceeding exactly according to plan. How do you force a machine to betray its creators without firing a single shot? The answer is hiding in the electromagnetic static. You are staring at that same blank radar screen, waiting for the inevitable confirmation of a shattered carbon fiber carcass scattered across the Afghan border. But that twisted wreckage never materializes. Instead, the narrative shifts abruptly from the agonizing silence of the operations center to the suffocating, windowless geometry of a Pentagon briefing room. Stacks of classified satellite reconnaissance hit the massive wooden table with a heavy, definitive thud. Analysts swarmed the imagery, frantically drawing vector lines across the topography, desperate to calculate the blast radius of a catastrophic impact. To the electronic warfare specialist, a crash is a mathematical certainty. Gravity is the ultimate, undefeated adversary. But as the camera pushes in on a single grainy photograph pulled from orbit, the collective breath leaves the room. You are not looking at a crater. You are looking at an aerodynamic impossibility resting gently on the dirt. The anomaly sits right there in the optical center of the photograph, challenging everything you were taught about modern aviation. The underbelly of the beast of Kandahar is pristine. The wings are unbroken. But the detail that sends a cold spike of adrenaline through the intelligence community is underneath the fuselage. The landing gear is fully extended. This is the ultimate paradox of the crime scene. Dead machines plunging from 50,000 feet simply do not lower their wheels. Forensic analysis of these first orbital images revealed a chilling, inescapable truth. If a kinetic weapon had ripped this billion-dollar asset from the sky, the airframe would be fundamentally pulverized. A deployed landing gear implies a terrifying degree of mechanical intent. It instantly eliminates the most comforting narrative Washington had, the theory of a lucky, blind shoot-down by an ancient surface-to-air missile. This aircraft was not murdered. It was coaxed to the ground. You have been programmed by Hollywood to believe that anti-aircraft missiles strike their targets directly like a bullet. The reality of ballistics is far more brutal. Missiles rely on proximity fuses. They are designed to detonate near the target, shredding the fragile avionics and carbon composite with thousands of pieces of superheated shrapnel. A successful missile strike leaves an aircraft looking like it was put through an industrial shredder. Yet as the electronic warfare specialist scrutinizes the high-resolution shadows cast upon the desert floor, the evidence is damning. There is absolutely zero shrapnel damage. The radar-absorbent skin is utterly unblemished. The beast is merely sleeping. The realization hits the room like a physical blow. You are not dealing with a lucky rebel holding a heat-seeking pipe bomb. You are sitting across the geopolitical chessboard from an opponent who understands your systems better than you do. To understand the magnitude of this heist, you must look inside the digital brain of the Sentinel. If a drone loses its encrypted connection to its human masters in Nevada, its core programming dictates a rigid, unyielding fail-safe protocol. It is mathematically chained to survival. It does not panic, and it certainly does not decide to gently land in hostile, heavily guarded enemy territory on a spontaneous, inexplicable whim. The software architecture is designed to turn the aircraft into a flying boomerang. The moment the digital tether snaps, the drone is supposed to gain altitude, turn around, and autonomously navigate back to a pre-programmed safe point within friendly borders. It is a strictly deterministic loop. For the drone to lower its wheels in a foreign desert, that fundamental survival instinct had to be surgically overwritten while the machine was still in the air. The physical investigation into aerodynamics and ballistics hits a dead end, forcing the analysts to pivot abruptly. The crime scene is not the dirt. It is the invisible, pulsing ether of the electromagnetic spectrum. To successfully capture a stealth drone without firing a single kinetic shot, the adversary first had to isolate the prey. They had to reach up into the stratosphere and cleanly sever the invisible umbilical cord connecting the drone to the orbital satellite network. This umbilical cord is a continuous stream of encrypted data, a lifeline of military-grade telemetry pulsing between space and the aircraft. Cutting it is the equivalent of blinding a predator mid-strike. But you cannot cut radio waves with a knife. You have to smother them. You have to fundamentally alter the background radiation of the combat zone, turning the clear, silent frequency into a deafening wall of electronic chaos. Through the eyes of the electronic warfare specialist, the battlefield transforms from a map of mountains and valleys into a cascading spectral graph of frequencies. The attacker did not need to break the impenetrable cryptography of the Central Intelligence Agency. That is a fool's errand. Instead, they recognized a basic vulnerability in how the machine listens to the world. They realized that if you can deafen the receiver, the encryption simply ceases to matter entirely. This is where your high school physics completely fails you. We assume absolute technological supremacy provides an impenetrable shield. We assume that, because the drone costs tens of millions of dollars, it is immune to the fundamental laws of radio interference. But the adversary understood a terrifyingly simple truth. A highly sophisticated, hyper-expensive antenna is still just a piece of metal waiting for a signal. And any signal, no matter how classified, can be drowned out. The Pentagon analysts stare at the photograph, the weight of the digital autopsy pressing down on them. The deployed landing gear is the undeniable signature of a successful kidnapping. The enemy managed to quietly gag the drone, severing its connection to the United States and leaving it completely isolated in the sky. But forcing a machine to go deaf is merely the first step of the heist. The truly terrifying question is how they taught the deaf machine a brand new, fatal lie. The photographs of the deployed landing gear force us to confront a deeply uncomfortable question. How exactly do you convince an autonomous billion-dollar machine to willingly sever its own remote control? You are taught to believe that military encryption is an impenetrable vault. I'm here to tell you that the vault is irrelevant if you simply bury it under a mountain of static. The adversary did not pick the lock. They simply deafened the guard. To understand this murder of a signal, step inside the anechoic chamber. The walls are lined with jagged foam wedges, designed to absorb all ambient electromagnetic radiation. Through the eyes of the electronic warfare specialist, the oscilloscope screen is a battlefield. Normally, you would see a small, rhythmic green pulse, the encrypted heartbeat of the satellite uplink. But today, the screen is violently overwhelmed by a massive wall of chaotic white noise. You assume that hacking requires brilliant code, a cinematic flurry of keystrokes penetrating a firewall. This is a complete misconception. The reality of electronic warfare is often brutally primitive. The attackers did not need to decode the Central Intelligence Agency's encrypted commands. That would take a supercomputer millions of years. Instead, they exploited a much more fundamental vulnerability in the laws of physics. They manipulated the noise floor. This is the concept of the noise floor. Every receiver on Earth, from your smartphone to a classified stealth drone, operates against a background level of ambient electromagnetic noise. To hear a transmission, the incoming signal must simply be louder than the floor. But what happens if the adversary artificially raises that floor? How do you silence a highly classified, multi-million-dollar transmitter? You do not. You simply become deafeningly louder than it. The first phase of the attack was a masterpiece of brute force, directional radio jamming. The adversary pointed a massive, high-powered transmitter directly at the airspace occupied by the Sentinel. They fired a concentrated blast of electromagnetic interference into the stratosphere. They did not speak the drone's language. They simply screamed pure, unadulterated mathematical chaos across the exact frequencies the aircraft used to communicate with its human masters. Consider the physics of this assault. It is exactly like trying to listen to a friend whisper a highly sensitive secret across a crowded, noisy room, while someone is blasting an air raid siren directly into your ear. The encrypted data was still flowing down from the orbital satellite. The words were still there. But the drone's internal receivers simply could not isolate that precise whisper from the violent, blinding roar of the localized jamming signal. The electronic warfare specialist watches the green pulse on the oscilloscope completely drown in the jagged static. There is a profound claustrophobia in this moment. The machine is suddenly rendered totally deaf, cut off from the commanders sitting thousands of miles away in Nevada. The stealth coating, the radar-absorbent paint, the aerodynamic perfection, all of it becomes utterly useless. The apex predator of the skies is reduced to a frightened, isolated piece of metal. This is where the illusion of control shatters. When you build an autonomous machine, you must give it a set of rules for when things go wrong. You have to program a reflex. The attackers knew this. They did not just want to blind the drone, they wanted to trigger its survival instincts. They understood that the machine's own unyielding logic, its absolute adherence to its programming, was the ultimate weapon they could use against it. They forced the anomaly. Once the satellite link was utterly smothered by the jamming signal, the Sentinel had no choice but to execute its programmed loss-of-link protocol. The human pilots in the United States were instantly locked out. The drone severed its own useless connection and switched over to total, unguided autopilot. It became a truly autonomous entity, relying solely on its internal computer brain to keep its wings level and its engine running in the cold air of the upper atmosphere. I want you to appreciate the predatory elegance of this maneuver. The adversary pushed the machine into a corner, forcing it to fall back on its emergency instructions. By raising the noise floor, they effectively kidnapped the drone's attention. The loss-of-link protocol is not a secret. It is standard operating procedure for any uncrewed aerial vehicle. The attackers used the drone's own predictable safety mechanisms to wrestle control away from the Central Intelligence Agency. The fail-safe protocol dictated a very specific, inflexible sequence of events. The Sentinel was commanded to immediately turn its nose around, fly toward a pre-programmed safe point near its home base, and initiate an automated landing sequence. It was a mechanical homing pigeon, desperate to return to its nest. But to execute this complex maneuver, the deafened machine desperately needed to know exactly where it was located in the three-dimensional space of the world. The specialist stares at the chaotic white noise on the screen, knowing the first phase of the trap has snapped shut perfectly. The drone is flying blind, deaf, and entirely alone over hostile territory. It is frantically searching for an anchor, a fixed point of reference to guide its autonomous flight path. The primary encrypted communication channel is dead. The machine is now incredibly vulnerable, blindly reaching out into the ether for any navigational beacon it can find. And this is exactly what the attackers were waiting for. They stripped away the drone's primary senses, forcing it to rely on its secondary automated backup systems. The machine was starved for navigational data, and in its desperation, it was about to commit a fatal error. It reached out for the faint, steady pulse of orbital navigation satellites. The adversary was not just waiting in the dark. They were already preparing to feed the starving machine a mathematically perfect lie. To understand the magnitude of this heist, I need you to step inside this dark room, illuminated only by the sterile green glow of a spectrum analyzer. We are watching the drone's autonomous backup systems desperately reach out into the void. When the jamming severed its primary link, the machine fell back on the Global Positioning System, or GPS. It needed a map, and the only map available was being broadcast from a constellation of satellites 12,000 miles above our heads. You have been taught to fear hackers breaking into firewalls, cracking complex alphanumeric passwords to steal your data. That is a Hollywood myth. The reality of cyber warfare is far more insidious and much simpler. You do not have to break the encryption if you can just feed the sensors a perfectly formatted lie. This is the concept of the spoof. Why pick the lock when you can convince the security system that you are the homeowner with the master key? Look closely at the data cascading down this spectrum analyzer. Those fragile spikes are the legitimate GPS signals from space. They do not transmit a map. They broadcast hyper-precise timestamps. By calculating the microsecond delay between the time the signal left the orbit and hit the receiver, the drone triangulates its exact location. It is pure, elegant mathematics. Under normal circumstances, American military aircraft rely on an impenetrable encrypted signal known as the PY code. But the initial jamming attack did more than just sever the drone's connection to its human pilots. It shattered the machine's cryptographic key synchronization. The drone panicked. Stripped of its secure channel, a critical, fatal design flaw took over. The billion-dollar machine fell back on the unencrypted, standard civilian GPS signal. The vulnerability of this civilian signal is difficult to overstate. By the time these radio waves travel through the atmosphere and reach the Earth from medium Earth orbit, they are astonishingly faint. We are talking about the power equivalence of a 50-watt light bulb viewed from 10,000 miles away. The signal is barely a whisper against the background radiation of the universe. And that whisper was the only thing keeping the Sentinel from crashing into a mountain. Now, watch the baseline of the spectrum analyzer. A new spike emerges from the digital mud. It is not coming from the stars. It is coming from the ground, broadcasting from a mobile transmitter hidden in the Iranian desert. It is a mathematically identical clone of the civilian GPS signal. The attackers are perfectly mimicking the voice of its trusted navigational beacon. The drone's internal logic is brutally binary. It lacks the human intuition to suspect a trap. Its algorithms are hardwired to lock onto the strongest, clearest frequency available. As the fake signal from the ground grows incrementally louder, outshining that faint 50-watt bulb in the sky, the machine makes a fatal choice. It entirely ignores the real signal from the orbital satellites and synchronizes its internal clock with the fraudulent transmission. The brilliance of this cyber heist lies in its complete avoidance of physical force. No alarms were tripped, no firewalls were breached. The adversary simply understood the drone's blind obedience to its sensory inputs better than the engineers who built it. They weaponized the algorithm against itself. The machine was not hacked. It was fundamentally deceived. It willingly handed over the keys to its own navigation system because the lie it was told was mathematically flawless. In this precise moment, the drone's perception of reality detaches entirely from physical truth. To the onboard computer, the fake timestamps align perfectly with its expected parameters. It is cruising at 50,000 feet, operating under the illusion of total control. But down in the operations center, the invisible leash has snapped. The central nervous system of America's most advanced stealth asset has been seamlessly spliced into an alien transmitter. Your assumption is that a billion-dollar machine possesses a fortified defense mechanism against such a basic trick. But the unencrypted civilian signal the Sentinel accepted is the exact same frequency guiding your smartphone, your car's navigation, and the commercial flight your family is on. If the apex of military engineering can be tricked by a localized transmitter broadcasting a slightly louder signal, your personal reliance on digital navigation makes you entirely defenseless. The attackers did not need a massive military-industrial complex to achieve this. They needed a deep understanding of radio frequency propagation and a commercial-grade transmitter. By exploiting the drone's automatic fallback protocol, they bypassed billions of dollars of stealth research. They turned the machine's greatest asset, its ability to fly completely autonomously, into its ultimate vulnerability. It is the asymmetric warfare of the digital age. This is the digital crime scene laid bare. There are no fingerprints, no shattered glass, just a subtle shift in the electromagnetic spectrum. The investigators looking at the logs months later would see only a machine operating exactly as programmed. It followed the strongest signal. It calculated the timestamps. It adjusted its pitch and yaw. Every mechanical action was flawlessly executed. But every action was based on an entirely fabricated foundation. Now the attackers hold the reins of the ghost. The drone believes it is still on its pre-programmed path home, but its internal map is no longer anchored to the actual geography of the Earth. The adversary has captured its mind, and the next step is to slowly, meticulously alter the coordinates. They are about to manipulate spatial relativity itself, pulling the invisible strings to guide this blind titan out of the sky and directly into their waiting hands. The adversary has captured its mind, and the next step is pulling the invisible strings to guide this blind titan out of the sky. Inside the dark bunker, the electronic warfare specialist watches a glowing three-dimensional wireframe map of the Earth. To this observer, the unfolding telemetry is not just a hijacked signal. It is the real-time manipulation of spatial relativity, a deliberate detachment of a machine's perception from physical truth. This is where we confront a terrifying concept: moving the Earth. If you control the mathematical foundation of an autonomous system, you do not need to physically shoot it down. You can simply move a mountain inside the machine's mind. The official narrative tells you our hardware is invincible, but the specialist watching the map knows the bitter truth. Trust in a digital coordinate is the ultimate vulnerability. Now that the attackers control the unencrypted civilian orbital feed, they must execute the trick without triggering the drone's internal alarm bells. You do not just teleport a classified aircraft across the map. If the coordinates jump instantly from one grid square to another, the internal logic flags a critical error. The telemetry shows they slowly, degree by degree, walked the perceived coordinates away from the actual location. This gradual mathematical drift pulls the virtual ghost of the Sentinel eastward. Inside its silicon brain, the drone believes it is safely crossing the border, heading straight toward its heavily fortified home base in Afghanistan. It is a flawless digital kidnapping, completely bypassing the billions of dollars spent on radar-absorbent materials. But the specialist identifies a massive geographical problem looming on the horizon. The target runway in Afghanistan and the hostile Iranian desert where the attackers wait sit at vastly different physical elevations. You might assume an advanced aircraft relies heavily on ground-penetrating radar or lasers to know exactly when to touch the dirt. You are mistaken, and that misconception is exactly what the attackers exploited. The Sentinel was navigating by the numbers, completely blind to the world outside. If the orbital triangulation tells the autopilot the ground is exactly 50 feet away, that becomes its absolute truth, regardless of the physical dirt beneath its belly. Inside the glowing wireframe simulation, the specialist watches the topography actively shift. The attackers inject a new mathematical variable into the fake broadcast, physically altering the altitude data embedded in the navigational stream. They artificially raise the digital elevation of the Iranian desert floor by several thousand feet inside the computer's memory. The drone computes this fabricated geometry and concludes it is now on final approach to its home base. The machine initiates the automated landing sequence exactly as its American designers programmed it to do. It lowers its landing gear and throttles back the engine. The drone expects the smooth tarmac of a friendly runway to meet its deployed wheels. Instead, because the actual terrain of the desert is much lower than the digital lie fed to the sensors, it is still hovering several dozen feet in the thin, arid air. It stalls its engine precisely when it believes it has touched down, resulting in a sudden, catastrophic drop out of the empty sky. It pancakes violently onto the hard dirt. The sheer force of the impact cracks the carbon fiber wing, but the gentle angle of the descent leaves the highly classified internal computers and the entire sensor payload completely intact. $1 billion of stealth supremacy was just defeated by basic geometry and a commercial radio transmitter. The perfect heist is absolutely complete. If this scale of asymmetric warfare shatters your assumptions about modern security, hit the like button and subscribe to follow the rest of this investigation. Do you think physical armor even matters anymore when the enemy can simply rewrite your reality? Let me know in the comments below, because we are watching the total obsolescence of traditional military doctrine play out in real time. Look closely at the sheer elegance of this crime through the eyes of the investigator. If American analysts were to recover the onboard telemetry, they would see a flawless flight log. The drone recorded a perfect landing exactly where it was supposed to be. The math checked out completely. The code executed without a single glitch or error warning. The machine did exactly what it was told. Only the cracked wing and the foreign soil reveal the terrifying truth. The machine did not fail mechanically. It obeyed a perfectly formatted lie unto its own capture. We built an apex predator of the skies, but we gave it a brain that trusts a sequence of ones and zeros more than its own physical momentum. This is the paradox of total automation that the official reports constantly try to hide. The military removes the human pilot from the cockpit to eliminate human error, to eradicate fear, fatigue, and hesitation. But in severing that biological link, you create an entity entirely devoid of context. A human pilot looks out the canopy, sees a barren desert instead of a paved runway, and aborts the landing. The algorithm only sees the data stream, and it follows it straight into the dirt. When that data stream is compromised, the very programming designed to save the aircraft becomes the mechanism of its own abduction. The fail-safe protocols engineered in Nevada were weaponized by an adversary who simply understood the math better. They turned the Sentinel's greatest asset, its ability to fly autonomously, into the very leash used to drag it into the trap. The beast of Kandahar is now grounded, sitting silently in the dust. The invisible war in the electromagnetic spectrum is over, and the physical autopsy is about to begin. The engineers waiting in Tehran are not just going to study the metal. They are preparing to dissect the minds of the people who built it, reverse engineering a monopoly that the West thought would last for decades. The beast of Kandahar did not stay in the dust for long. The physical capture out in the desert was merely the prologue to a much more profound violation. Months later, the battlefield shifts from the open dunes to a brightly lit, hyper-sterile subterranean laboratory in Tehran. The invisible war of radio frequencies is replaced by the glaring, surgical reality of fluorescent lights. Through the eyes of the aerospace forensic analyst, this is no longer an aircraft. It is a cadaver on an operating table. Engineers in white hazmat suits meticulously peel back the outer skin of the captured drone. Laser scanners sweep across the dark gray chassis, mapping every contour down to the micrometer. Sparks fly as a plasma cutter bites into the avionics bay, exposing the machine's electronic brain. The official narrative from Washington downplayed the event, claiming the technology was too complex to copy. That is a dangerous, arrogant myth. You are witnessing a digital autopsy. These analysts are not just looking at bent metal and severed wires. They are prying open the skulls of the American engineers who built it. They are reading the foundational logic of Western air supremacy. You have been programmed to believe that state secrets are locked inside reinforced concrete vaults at intelligence headquarters. But the highest-tier secrets of a superpower are actually baked right into the physical geometry and chemical makeup of its weapons. The moment that drone dropped into hostile hands, the vault was effectively blown wide open. It became the greatest open-source intelligence find of the century. Transporting the Sentinel to this underground bunker initiated an intelligence catastrophe of unprecedented scale. The forensic team did not simply dismantle the machine. They began a painstakingly slow, methodical process of reverse engineering. Every single rivet, every composite panel, and every line of code was cataloged as a vital clue in a massive technological detective story. They started with the skin. The analyst knows that true stealth is not about shape alone. It is about chemistry. They subjected the classified radar-absorbent coating to rigorous spectrographic analysis. They were searching for the exact molecular recipe that allowed this machine to swallow incoming electromagnetic energy. They needed to know exactly how the invisible ghost was painted. The microscopic structure of that black paint is specifically designed to trap and dissipate incoming radar waves, converting them directly into heat instead of bouncing them back to a receiver. By scraping off those samples and running them through mass spectrometers, the adversary was stealing a metallurgical formula that cost the United States billions of dollars and decades of research to perfect. But the exterior was just the shell. Deep inside the chassis, they extracted the drone's internal fiber-optic gyroscopes. These are the absolute pinnacle of navigational engineering. The analysts aggressively tore down the inertial measurement units, slicing into the sealed, ultra-precise instruments that allowed the Sentinel to balance itself in flight without any human input. To the forensic team, these gyroscopes represent the mechanical inner ear of the beast. They measure rotation by analyzing the interference patterns of laser beams traveling through miles of coiled glass thread. By dissecting these units, they learned exactly how the flight computer senses gravity, acceleration, and pitch. They were literally reverse engineering the drone's sense of balance. Most importantly, they accessed the core architecture of the flying wing design itself. You might think removing the tail from an aircraft makes it sleeker, but aerodynamically, it makes the platform inherently unstable. A tailless aircraft naturally wants to flip out of control. It requires constant microsecond adjustments from the flight computer just to maintain a straight and level trajectory. By interrogating the surviving data drives and mapping the control surfaces, the engineers solved the complex aerodynamic equations required to keep this unstable geometry airborne. They extracted the proprietary algorithms that allowed the Sentinel to cheat the laws of physics. The code was no longer a black box. It was a fully decoded blueprint, laid bare under the harsh laboratory lights. The magnitude of this theft is staggering. When you capture the source code of a nation's most advanced stealth platform, you do not just gain a temporary tactical advantage. You completely bypass the agonizing trial and error of the research phase. You steal time. In a matter of months, the analysts in that bunker absorbed the entire evolutionary history of American stealth technology. I realized, looking at those laser scans, that the true threat had fundamentally mutated. The physical RQ-170 would never fly again, but its genetic code had been fully extracted and successfully sequenced. The digital DNA of the ultimate American predator was now in the hands of an adversary who had no intention of keeping it confined to a laboratory. The cloning process was about to begin. The sterile silence of that subterranean laboratory did not last long. To the aerospace forensic analyst standing amidst the deafening roar of a dusty industrial assembly line, the true horror of the American intelligence failure is finally taking physical shape. Showers of bright orange sparks rain down as heavy robotic arms weld seam after seam on identical matte black fuselages. The painstaking dissection we witnessed earlier has mutated into relentless, terrifying mass production. You are looking at the nightmare scenario of modern military engineering. The absolute worst thing about a stolen digital secret is that, unlike a physical object, it can be endlessly and perfectly replicated without degrading. The analyst watches hundreds of Delta Wing machines roll off the line, realizing that the United States did not just lose a single aircraft in that desert. They inadvertently handed over the master key to an entirely new paradigm of asymmetric warfare. Your textbooks probably taught you that developing cutting-edge aerospace technology requires decades of trial and error and hundreds of billions of dollars. But what happens when you simply bypass the research phase entirely? Within a few short years of that desert heist, the captured data birthed a completely new generation of hostile aircraft. The analyst logs the visual evolution chart appearing on the monitors, linking the genetic DNA of the American Sentinel directly to its offspring. These are not crude mock-ups built for a propaganda reel. These are the Shahed 171 Simorgh and the Sergei stealth drones. Direct, fully functional genetic descendants of the captured American machine. To the forensic observer, the resemblance is chillingly exact. The aerodynamic profile, the sweep of the wings, the radar-evading geometry. It is all there. The most closely guarded secrets of Nevada and California are now rolling off a dusty factory floor in the Middle East. But if you look closer at the exposed avionics bays on the assembly line, you realize the engineers did not merely create a carbon copy. Copying is a sign of lack of imagination. Instead, they performed a ruthless optimization. The forensic analyst identifies the missing components. The heavy, bespoke American subsystems are gone. The creators of this new fleet intentionally stripped away the over-engineered complexities that defined the original American doctrine. They recognized that building a perfect replica was an unnecessary burden. So, they replaced the incredibly expensive classified American internal components with surprisingly cheap, commercially available technology. They gutted the sophisticated espionage suite and replaced it with off-the-shelf microprocessors and guidance modules you could theoretically order from a global supply chain. They kept the elite aerodynamic shell, but fundamentally altered the organs inside the beast. This is where the true detective work reveals the motive of the crime. This is no longer a story about aerodynamics. It is a story about brutal, unforgiving mathematics. The original RQ-170 Sentinel was a bespoke masterpiece that cost the American taxpayer tens of millions of dollars to produce. It was a singular, precious asset, treated with extreme operational caution. Its cloned descendants, however, completely invert that financial constraint. By utilizing commercial electronics and brutalist manufacturing techniques, these derivative airframes can be produced for mere tens of thousands of dollars. The analyst doing the math on the factory floor realizes the terrifying implication. For the price of a single American stealth drone, the adversary can now stamp out an entire battalion of radar-evading clones. The barrier to entry for advanced stealth capability just plummeted from the stratosphere down to the dirt. You have to understand how profoundly this cheapens the concept of military supremacy. The original Sentinel was a precision instrument designed for silent, solitary intelligence gathering deep behind enemy lines. It was a surgical scalpel. But when you reduce the production cost by a factor of 1,000, you no longer care if the machine survives the mission. The forensic analyst watches the final warheads being loaded into the fuselages, realizing the doctrine has shifted entirely. They transformed a high-value intelligence-gathering platform into a mass-produced, expendable loitering munition. These drones are not designed to take photographs and return to base. They're designed to fly into the target and detonate. The brilliant stealth geometry stolen from the Central Intelligence Agency is no longer being used to hide a camera. It is being used to deliver high explosives through defense networks that are entirely unprepared for this new reality. You likely assume that the most advanced military on Earth will always maintain its advantage because it has the largest budget. This assembly line proves you wrong. We spent decades and billions of dollars perfecting the physics of radar evasion, only to have that exact knowledge weaponized against us on a budget that rivals a municipal construction project. The technological fortress was breached, and the blueprints were distributed to the lowest bidder. As the endless line of cloned drones inches forward under the shower of welding sparks, the sheer volume of production becomes the weapon itself. The aerospace analyst understands that defending against one invisible aircraft is a difficult technological challenge. But defending against a sky filled with hundreds of cheap, disposable, radar-evading bombs is an economic impossibility. The heist in the desert did not just steal a machine. It stole the entire concept of air superiority. We thought we were building an untouchable predator, a solitary hunter that owned the night sky. But the moment those encrypted navigational protocols failed and gravity pulled our secrets into the sand, we initiated a global proliferation event. The scalpel was analyzed, dismantled, and reverse-engineered into something far more primitive, yet far more dangerous. We handed them the blueprint for the perfect weapon, and they decided to build an endless swarm. Step out of the sparks of that Iranian assembly line and step into the suffocating panic of a modern operations center. The air here is thick with the shrieks of proximity alarms. Radar screens, designed to track a handful of sophisticated fighter jets, are currently whiting out under the sheer volume of dozens of incoming contacts. Those cheap Delta-wing descendants of our captured Sentinel have arrived on the front lines of Eastern Europe and the Middle East, and they are hungry. You have been conditioned by decades of Hollywood blockbusters to believe that the side with the biggest explosions and the most expensive lasers always wins. I need you to unlearn that myth right now. Look at the tactical map flashing red in front of us. This is not a battle of firepower. This is an economic hostage situation. We are watching a devastating mathematical anomaly play out in real time, where absolute technological superiority becomes a fatal liability. Watch what happens when a swarm of these reverse-engineered clones enters the airspace. The automated defense systems instantly lock on and fire. A magnificent trail of fire streaks across the sky as a Patriot missile obliterates the incoming threat. It looks like a victory, but calculate the cost. We just fired a $2 million interceptor to destroy a piece of flying fiberglass that cost exactly $20,000 to manufacture. Do the math on that exchange rate. The adversary does not need to destroy our military bases to defeat us. They simply need to force us to defend ourselves. If you spend $2 million to block a $20,000 punch, you will bankrupt your own empire long before the enemy runs out of cheap drones. This is the brutal calculus of asymmetric warfare. It is a financial bleed-out, hidden behind the spectacular flash of successful mid-air interceptions. But the threat goes far deeper than just burning through our defense budget. The actual architecture of our air defense networks was never designed for this type of saturation. These systems were built during the Cold War to track fast, high-altitude ballistic missiles or a few rogue fighter jets. When you launch 40 of these cheap, radar-evading clones simultaneously, you do not just threaten the physical target. You attack the electronic brain of the defense network itself. The phased array radars are forced to slice their processing power into dozens of microscopic fractions. The system tries to calculate firing solutions for every single incoming piece of flying plastic, and the computational capacity simply chokes. It is a deliberate denial-of-service attack executed with high explosives in physical space. They are crashing our million-dollar targeting computers with the aerodynamic equivalent of spam mail. This is the true fallout of that dark December night in 2011. The most guarded secret of the American military-industrial complex, the geometry of invisibility, was forcibly open-sourced. Stealth technology was once the exclusive, untouchable domain of global superpowers. It required specialized metallurgy, classified physics, and bottomless budgets. Now, it is a readily accessible commodity, circulating freely among insurgencies and regional militias. We spent half a century building an exclusive club of air superiority, assuming the high price of admission would keep our adversaries grounded. But the capture of the Sentinel shattered that barrier to entry. By deciphering the aerodynamic code of that one downed wing, they bypassed decades of costly research and development. We practically subsidized their technological leap, handing them the precise mathematical blueprints required to slip past our own radar screens. As the alarms continue to wail in the operations center, the terrifying reality sets in. The playing field has not just been leveled, it has been fundamentally tilted. We are watching the sunset of an era where bespoke multi-million-dollar weapons dictated the fate of nations. The sky no longer belongs to the predator with the sharpest claws. It now belongs to the swarm that can multiply faster than we can pull the trigger. The sky no longer belongs to the predator. Look down from that overwhelmed airspace to the desert floor below. It is a graveyard of the 21st century. Multi-million-dollar radar dishes, charred missile batteries, and the rusted husks of bespoke titanium armor lie abandoned in the sand. Above them, an endless, circling flock of cheap, disposable plastic drones blots out the sun. This is not a temporary setback in military procurement. This is an evolutionary dead end. We spent the last hour dissecting a cybercrime in the stratosphere, tracking the mathematical exploit that grounded an apex predator. But the verdict of this investigation extends far beyond a single airstrip in Iran. The capture of the Sentinel in 2011 was not merely a tactical defeat. It was a catastrophic failure of imagination. We built an impenetrable fortress, but left the front gate entirely vulnerable to a mathematician armed with a radio transmitter. Here is the final axiom you must accept. The myth of absolute technological supremacy is dead. We spent decades assuming that altitude, radar-absorbent paint, and sheer financial mass granted us immunity from the laws of physics and economics. But armor and altitude mean absolutely nothing if your opponent can simply rewrite your machine's perception of reality. We learned that absolute trust in a digital signal is a fatal flaw when that signal can be perfectly counterfeited. The inescapable lesson of this forensic autopsy is that complexity is now synonymous with fragility. For half a century, Western engineering operated on the assumption that adding more sensors, more code, and more automated overrides made a system inherently safer. We now know the exact opposite is true. The more interconnected and automated our digital infrastructure becomes, the larger the attack surface we expose to anyone who understands the underlying logic. We are standing on the threshold of an era where global conflicts will no longer be decided by the nation capable of forging the thickest armor or splitting the atom. Tomorrow belongs to the adversary who can most creatively exploit the invisible algorithms governing our physical world. The paradigm has shifted from kinetic destruction to cognitive deception. Why destroy a machine when you can simply whisper a lie into its sensors and convince it to cleanly land itself? Do not make the mistake of thinking this vulnerability is confined to classified airspace or active war zones. The stealth drone was nothing more than a high-profile proof of concept. The exact same navigational mathematics, the same foundational reliance on time and space coordinates transmitted from orbiting satellites, governs the civilian world you navigate every single day. The invisible umbilical cord that was severed over the desert is the very same one you rely upon. The entire physical infrastructure of modern civilization operates on this exact same fragile trust in digital signals. The synchronization of our global financial networks, the routing of commercial cargo ships, the precise timing of our municipal power grids, and the autopilot systems guiding commercial airliners all depend on the unquestioned integrity of unencrypted data. We have completely outsourced our reality to algorithms that are incredibly easy to deceive. This investigation into the illusion of control is only just beginning, and the attack surface is expanding every single day. If this forensic analysis gave you a new perspective on the security of our modern world, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. That is exactly how we know this rigorous approach resonates, and it allows us to continue deconstructing the unseen systems that quietly dictate our future. The conversation must continue, because the threat is evolving. The true horror of the Sentinel capture is not that $1 billion secret was stolen, but that the underlying heist never actually stopped. It simply expanded its scope, turning our entire digitized existence into an open target. We built a world of unparalleled convenience, entirely blind to the fact that we constructed it on a foundation of exploitable math. The illusion is permanently dispelled. Class dismissed.